Welcome to Life Stories. In today's tale, we uncover a gripping narrative of betrayal, resilience, and redemption. Mark and his son Jason faced unimaginable trials when trust was broken within their family. What unfolds is a story filled with powerful emotions, profound lessons, and the unyielding strength of the human spirit. Please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to turn on post notifications so you never miss another inspiring story. Sit back, relax, and let's begin today's journey into the incredible world of life stories. It all began on a calm, golden evening in the heart of California. Linda stood by the large window in their Beverly Hills mansion, gazing out at the immaculate gardens below. The sun bathed everything in a soft glow, highlighting the picture-perfect life she had always worked so hard to maintain. At 38, Linda had what many could only dream of: a beautiful home, a wardrobe brimming with designer clothes, glittering jewelry, and a husband, Mark, whose success seemed almost unmatched. To everyone around them, they were the epitome of the ideal couple, living a life others envied. Yet, behind those gilded walls, something was amiss. Linda could feel it, an uneasy sensation that gnawed at her, growing stronger with each passing day. It wasn't any one thing, it was a collection of small details that painted a picture she didn't want to see. Mark, at 40, had built his business empire through sheer determination and hard work. Meetings stretched long into the night. Business trips piled onto an already demanding schedule, and phone calls often took him into another room, out of earshot. At first, Linda told herself it was normal, the price of success. But as the late nights grew more frequent and Mark became more distant, doubts began to creep in. She hadn't always been this way, questioning, doubting, second-guessing. Once, Mark had been her everything, a man who had swept her off her feet with grand gestures of love and unwavering support. He had worked tirelessly to give them the life they now had. And Linda had basked in the attention, the admiration, the certainty of being his one and only. But lately, she felt her position slipping. The laughs they used to share over dinner were now replaced by polite exchanges. The look in his eyes, once so warm and adoring, seemed veiled, preoccupied with something or someone else. Linda tried to brush it off as paranoia. "I'm imagining things," she muttered to herself one sleepless night. Yet, deep down, the seed of doubt had already taken root. She had prided herself on always being in control, the woman who had it all together. But now, as her thoughts spiraled, she felt that control slipping through her fingers like sand. Her mind began to race with possibilities. Was Mark seeing someone else? Was there another woman? Every late meeting, every business call, every glance away when she tried to talk to him seemed to confirm her fears. The jealousy took hold in ways Linda had never experienced before. She began watching him more closely, analyzing every word he said, every action he took. But Mark, whether intentionally or not, remained an enigma. His demeanor didn't change. He was polite, even kind. But the passion that once defined their relationship felt absent. One evening, as they sat in the living room with the television on but neither of them really watching, Linda decided she couldn't bear the uncertainty any longer. "Mark," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "is there something you're not telling me?" He glanced up, surprised. "What do you mean?" he asked, his brow furrowing in genuine confusion. "You've been so distant lately," she said, trying to steady her voice. "I just feel like something's changed." Mark sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Work has been overwhelming, Linda. I'm sorry if it's affected us. But you know how much I've been juggling lately." His answer was reasonable, too reasonable. Linda nodded but felt no relief. Instead, her unease deepened. She couldn't tell whether his words were sincere or a calculated way to deflect her suspicions. That night, as Mark slept soundly beside her, Linda lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her fears weren't just going to go away. She needed answers. The next morning, she made a decision that surprised even herself. She contacted a private investigator. The idea of someone tailing her husband felt invasive, even wrong. But Linda justified it to herself. "I need to know the truth," she whispered, pacing her home office as she finalized the arrangements. Days later, the investigator returned with a report. Linda's heart pounded as she read the details. There was no evidence of Mark meeting another woman. No suspicious rendezvous or unexplained absences. But one name stood out: Caroline. A business associate. Mark had met with her several times at cafes and restaurants. Always during the day. And always in public. The report described their interactions as professional. But that wasn't enough for Linda. The jealousy that had been festering for weeks now turned into full-blown paranoia. Why didn't he tell me about her? She thought bitterly. Her mind conjured images of Mark and Caroline laughing over coffee, discussing projects, sharing moments he once reserved for her. It was too much to bear. Linda's fears, once whispers in the back of her mind, became a deafening roar. She couldn't let this continue. Something had to be done. And in her desperation, she was willing to take any step necessary to regain control. Linda's mind raced as she paced the expansive living room, the plush carpet muffling her anxious footsteps. Her initial relief that Mark hadn't been caught in outright infidelity had been short-lived. The report, though not damning, had planted a seed she couldn't ignore. Caroline, this name now loomed large in Linda's mind. The idea of her husband sharing moments with another woman, no matter how innocuous, felt like a betrayal. The cracks in her once perfect life were widening, and her need to regain control grew stronger. Mark continued to move through their days as if nothing were wrong. He worked long hours, excused himself for calls, and occasionally mentioned upcoming meetings. Linda noticed, with increasing irritation, that he never brought up Caroline's name. Was it deliberate? Or did he simply think she wouldn't care? The ambiguity drove her mad. One evening, while Mark was out late, Linda sat alone in the dimly lit dining room, her wine glass untouched. The silence of the house pressed in on her. Her thoughts spiraled. And the more she replayed the investigator's report in her mind, the angrier she became. It wasn't just jealousy, it was fear. Fear of losing the life she had carefully curated. The admiration of her peers. And the stability she had come to take for granted. Her gaze fell on the framed photo of her and Mark on the mantel. They looked so happy, standing arm in arm on a beach during their honeymoon in Maui. She barely recognized the carefree smiles in the photo. That was a different time. A different them. The chasm between them now felt insurmountable. And Linda didn't know how to bridge it or if she even wanted to. Driven by desperation, Linda began taking small steps to reassert control over her life. She went through Mark's belongings when he wasn't home, searching for evidence of anything amiss. She combed through his phone bills, scrutinized receipts, and even checked his emails when he left his laptop unattended. Yet, there was nothing concrete to justify her suspicions. But the lack of evidence didn't quell her fears. Instead, it made her feel more isolated, more certain that something was being hidden from her. Her breaking point came one Friday evening. Mark arrived home later than usual, his shirt slightly rumpled, and a faint scent of cologne lingering around him. He greeted her with a tired smile and a brief kiss on the cheek before heading upstairs to change. Linda stood frozen in the hallway, her mind racing. Had he been with Caroline? Was that why he smelled so polished? So unlike the man who used to come home to her with enthusiasm and warmth. By the time Mark returned downstairs, Linda's frustration had boiled over. She confronted him in the kitchen, her voice sharp and unyielding. "Mark, are you hiding something from me?" she demanded. Her arms crossed tightly. He blinked, startled by her tone. "Hiding something? What are you talking about?" Her voice trembled with anger and accusation. "Don't play dumb. Mark, You've been distant. Secretive. Who's Caroline? And why are you spending so much time with her? Mark's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. Caroline? She's a business associate. Linda. We've been working on a new project. That's it. That's it, she repeated, her voice rising. Do you think I'm stupid? I've seen the receipts. Mark. I've seen the meetings. Why didn't you tell me about her? His jaw tightened as he let out a weary sigh. Because it's work. That's all it is. I didn't think I needed to explain every meeting or interaction. Linda's chest heaved with indignation. You didn't think I'd care? How could you not see how this looks to me? Mark held her gaze, his frustration evident. Linda. You're making this into something it's not. I've been working hard for us. For this life we have. And Caroline, she's just a colleague. But Linda wasn't satisfied. His calm demeanor felt dismissive. Almost patronizing. She wanted more, an admission. A reassurance. Something that would validate her emotions. But Mark, exhausted and bewildered, simply walked past her, muttering, I don't have the energy for this right now. His indifference cut deeper than any words could have. As she stood alone in the kitchen, the echo of his retreating footsteps ringing in her ears, Linda realized she had reached her limit. This wasn't just about Caroline or Mark's behavior, it was about her control over her life slipping away. And she couldn't allow that. That night, a dangerous resolve took root in her heart. If Mark wasn't going to come clean, if he wasn't going to reassure her, then she would take matters into her own hands. Her jealousy, her fear, and her resentment coalesced into a plan. It wasn't about saving their marriage anymore, it was about ensuring she came out on top. No matter the cost. Linda's determination to regain control transformed her into someone she hardly recognized. The once charismatic, poised woman had been replaced by someone consumed by fear and desperation. She spent her days plotting her next move, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. If Mark truly wasn't going to confess, she would force him to face consequences whether he deserved them or not. Late one night, while Mark was asleep, Linda sat in the dim glow of her laptop, her fingers trembling as they hovered over the keyboard. She had concocted a story, one that would cast her as the victim and Mark as the villain. It wasn't grounded in truth. But Linda had convinced herself that the ends justified the means. She told herself it was Mark's fault for pushing her to this breaking point. If he had been more transparent, if he had reassured her, she wouldn't have needed to take such drastic action. The next morning, Linda made a call that set everything in motion. She contacted an old acquaintance, a lawyer known for their ability to spin a story and manipulate a situation to their client's advantage. Linda laid out her fabricated claims, alleging that Mark had been embezzling funds from his business. She painted herself as a woman blindsided by her husband's deceit, her voice trembling as she wove her tale. The lawyer, intrigued and sympathetic, agreed to help. They advised Linda on the next steps, including filing a formal complaint with the authorities. Linda hesitated for only a moment before agreeing. Once she hung up, the gravity of what she was doing began to sink in. She had set a chain of events in motion that couldn't be undone. But instead of feeling guilt, she felt a flicker of satisfaction. For the first time in months, she felt in control. When the police arrived at their home later that week, the sight of Mark being handcuffed and led away filled Linda with a strange mix of triumph and dread. She stood in the doorway, her expression carefully composed as neighbors peeked from their windows. Mark's protests echoed in her ears, his confusion and indignation palpable as he demanded to know what was happening. Linda, what is this? Why are they saying I embezzled money? You know I'd never. She met his gaze, her eyes cold. I don't know. Mark. Maybe you should have been more honest with me. The words felt heavy, and for a fleeting moment, Linda saw the betrayal etched into his face. But she quickly buried her hesitation. This was necessary, she told herself. He needed to understand the pain he had caused her. the helplessness she had felt. With Mark behind bars, Linda wasted no time asserting control over their assets. She sold the house for a sizable sum, liquidated their joint accounts, and ensured she maintained a lavish lifestyle. Friends and acquaintances flocked to her side, offering condolences and words of support for the wronged wife. Linda basked in the attention, though deep down, a gnawing emptiness persisted. As the days turned into weeks, Linda began to notice the subtle shift in her son Jason's demeanor. The 13-year-old had always been perceptive, and the changes in their home hadn't escaped his notice. He had overheard the arguments, witnessed his father's arrest, and seen the strain on his mother's face despite her attempts to mask it. Jason started asking questions innocent at first, but increasingly pointed. "Mom, why did Dad get arrested? Did he really do something bad?" Linda would deflect with vague answers, brushing off his inquiries. "It's complicated, sweetheart. Just focus on school." "Okay." But Jason wasn't satisfied. He missed his father, and the picture Linda painted of him didn't align with the man he knew. As Linda continued to manipulate the narrative, Jason began to piece things together. He noticed the papers in her office, the hushed phone calls, and the way she seemed more preoccupied with maintaining appearances than dealing with the reality of their situation. One evening, while Linda was out meeting with her lawyer, Jason crept into her office. His heart pounded as he rifled through her drawers, searching for anything that might explain what was really going on. When he found the documents detailing the sale of their house and the transfers from his father's accounts, his breath caught. It didn't take long for him to realize the truth. His mother had orchestrated the entire situation. Jason's hands shook as he processed the betrayal. His mother, the person he trusted most, had turned their world upside down for her own gain. But instead of succumbing to despair, Jason felt a surge of determination. He had to do something. He had to expose the truth, not just for his father, but for the family they had lost. Jason couldn't sleep that night. The weight of his discovery pressed down on him, leaving him restless and uneasy. His mind raced with questions. Why would his mother do this? How could she betray the family she claimed to love? Despite his young age, Jason understood the gravity of the situation. His father, who had always been a constant source of love and support, was suffering because of lies his mother had spun. Jason knew he had to act. The next morning, as Linda prepared for yet another meeting, Jason watched her carefully. She moved with an air of confidence, her polished demeanor betraying none of the chaos she had caused. Jason's heart ached, but he steeled himself. He had to stay calm, keep his intentions hidden. Confronting her outright wouldn't help, not yet. Instead, he decided to seek outside help. Jason thought about who he could trust. His first instinct was to reach out to a lawyer, someone who could help unravel the web of deceit his mother had woven. After school that day, he slipped away to use a public library computer, carefully researching local attorneys. Eventually, he found someone who specialized in wrongful accusations and family disputes. The lawyer, intrigued by Jason's maturity and determination, agreed to meet with him. When Jason arrived at the law office, clutching the folder of documents he had uncovered, he felt a mix of fear and resolve. The lawyer, Mr. Carter, welcomed him warmly, though he seemed skeptical at first. "You're young to be handling something like this," he said gently. "Are you sure this is what you want to do?" Jason nodded, his jaw set with determination. "I have to. My dad doesn't deserve what's happening to him. And my mom, she's not who she used to be." As Jason laid out the evidence, Mr. Carter's expression shifted from doubt to astonishment. The documents painted a clear picture. Linda had manipulated the situation to gain control of the family's wealth, framing Mark in the process. The forged signatures, the suspicious transactions, it was all there in black and white. Mr. Carter leaned back in his chair, tapping the edge of the papers. "This is serious. Jason, if what you're saying is true, Your mom could face legal consequences. Are you prepared for that? Jason hesitated. Despite everything, Linda was still his mother. But the image of his father, sitting alone in a prison cell, strengthened his resolve. I am, he said firmly. She needs to face the truth. The two began formulating a plan. Mr. Carter would use the evidence to file a motion for Mark's release, presenting the documents as proof of his innocence. At the same time, he would initiate an investigation into Linda's actions. Jason knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to see it through. Back at home, Linda was oblivious to her son's actions. She continued to play the role of the grieving wife, attending social events and garnering sympathy from those around her. But Jason could see through her facade. He noticed the cracks in her composure, the fleeting moments of doubt that crossed her face when she thought no one was looking. One evening, as Linda sat in the living room reviewing some papers, Jason decided it was time to confront her. He stood in the doorway, his heart pounding, clutching a copy of the evidence he had shared with Mr. Carter. "Mom," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "We need to talk." Linda looked up, surprised by the seriousness in his tone. "What is it, sweetheart?" Jason stepped forward, holding out the papers. "I know what you've done. I know you framed Dad." The color drained from Linda's face as she took the papers, her hands trembling. For the first time, Jason saw fear in her eyes. She skimmed the documents, her breath quickening. "Jason, I can explain." "No," he interrupted, his voice firm. "You can't. You lied. You took everything from him. From us. And you didn't care who you hurt." Linda's eyes filled with tears. But Jason didn't waver. "I loved you, Mom. I trusted you. But now, I don't even know who you are." The confrontation left Linda speechless. She sat frozen, clutching the papers. As Jason turned and walked away, he had done what he needed to do. Now, it was up to the truth to take its course. After confronting his mother, Jason felt both relief and sorrow. The house was heavy with silence, the kind that weighed down on him as he navigated the aftermath of his actions. Linda had retreated to her room, shutting the door as if to block out the reality that her son had uncovered her lies. Jason knew that the days ahead would not be easy, but he clung to the hope that justice for his father was within reach. True to his word, Mr. Carter wasted no time in taking legal action. The documents Jason had provided were damning, and their implications were far-reaching. Within days, a petition for Mark's release was filed, citing the fraudulent activities Linda had orchestrated. Meanwhile, investigators began delving into Linda's financial records, uncovering a web of deceit even more intricate than Jason had imagined. The media soon caught wind of the unfolding drama. What had once been a private family matter now became a public spectacle. Headlines painted Linda as a calculating woman who had betrayed her husband and her family for greed. Jason, despite being only 13, found himself thrust into the spotlight as the brave boy who had exposed the truth. Though he appreciated the support, he longed for the quiet life they had once shared before everything fell apart. Mark's release came faster than anyone expected. When the judge reviewed the evidence, the case against him unraveled almost instantly. The courtroom was filled with a mix of relief and tension as Mark stepped out as a free man, his eyes scanning the crowd for the son who had fought for him. Jason rushed forward, and the two embraced tightly, tears streaming down their faces. "I knew you'd never give up on me," Mark whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "I couldn't, Dad." Jason replied, "You didn't deserve this." While Mark's freedom was a victory, the battle was far from over. Linda's actions had left a trail of devastation, and now she had to face the consequences. When investigators presented their findings, the evidence was overwhelming. Linda was charged with fraud, forgery, and perjury, among other offenses. The The woman who once exuded confidence and control now found herself on the other side of the legal system, facing the reality of her choices. The trial that followed was a whirlwind of emotions for everyone involved. Jason testified against his mother, a painful but necessary step in seeking justice. Linda, sitting at the defense table, looked like a shadow of her former self. Gone was the polished woman who had controlled every aspect of her life. In her place was someone humbled by the weight of her mistakes. Throughout the proceedings, Mark remained a steady presence for Jason. The bond between father and son, forged through their shared pain, grew stronger with each passing day. Mark reassured Jason that he had done the right thing, even as Jason grappled with the guilt of betraying his mother. Linda's defense tried to paint her actions as desperate measures taken by a woman who felt abandoned and insecure. But the evidence spoke louder than any plea for sympathy. The forged documents, the fraudulent transactions, and the elaborate lies all pointed to a calculated effort to destroy Mark's life for personal gain. The verdict was clear. Linda was found guilty on multiple counts and sentenced to serve time in prison. As the judge delivered the sentence, Linda's composure cracked. Tears streamed down her face as she realized the full extent of what she had lost, not just her freedom, but the trust and love of her family. When the trial ended, Mark and Jason walked out of the courtroom together, ready to rebuild their lives. The road ahead was uncertain, but they knew they had each other. Mark's business, once nearly ruined by Linda's actions, began to recover, and though the scars of the past would remain, they found solace in their newfound strength. As for Linda, prison became a place of reflection. Stripped of her wealth and status, she was left alone with her thoughts. For the first time, she began to confront the choices that had led her to this point. She wondered if she would ever be able to mend the broken pieces of her life or if the damage she had caused was irreparable. For Jason, life slowly returned to a new normal. He excelled in school, finding purpose in his studies and a sense of pride in standing up for what was right. Though the pain of his mother's betrayal lingered, he knew that he had made the right decision. He had protected his father, exposed the truth, and ensured that justice was served. Their family's story was one of heartbreak and resilience, a reminder that even in the face of betrayal, love and truth could prevail. And though the journey had been painful, it had also brought Jason and Mark closer than ever before, a bond forged in the fire of adversity, unbreakable and enduring. Months after the trial, Mark and Jason had found a rhythm to their new life. Their home, though smaller than the one they had lost, felt warmer and more filled with love than ever before. The absence of luxury didn't matter. What they had gained, each other's unwavering support, was far more valuable. They spent their days working together to rebuild Mark's business and their nights talking about dreams for the future. Mark often marveled at Jason's strength. For someone so young, Jason had shown extraordinary courage and wisdom. "You've taught me what it means to fight for what matters," Mark said one evening as they sat on the porch. "I'll never forget what you've done for me." Jason shrugged, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I just wanted to make things right, Dad. We didn't deserve what happened to us." While Mark and Jason moved forward, Linda's life had taken a very different turn. In prison, she was forced to confront the harsh reality of her actions. The days were long, filled with monotonous routines and the cold stares of those who knew her story. She was no longer the powerful, poised woman she had once been. Stripped of her wealth and status, she had nothing left but time to reflect, to regret, and to wonder if she could ever redeem herself. The memories of Jason's betrayal haunted her the most. She had always thought of him as her little boy, someone who would love her unconditionally. But in the end, her greed had driven him away. She replayed their confrontation in her mind, the anger in his eyes and the pain in his voice. She knew she had shattered his trust, and the thought was almost too much to bear. Still, there was a flicker of hope. Jason's words during their last conversation echoed in her mind, "I'm not angry anymore. It was a small glimmer of forgiveness. And Linda clung to it like a lifeline. She resolved to write him a letter, unsure if he would even read it, but desperate to express her remorse. Meanwhile, Jason was thriving, encouraged by Mark. He channeled his experiences into a school project about justice and the importance of standing up for the truth. His teachers praised his work, and his classmates looked up to him. Jason had become a symbol of resilience, not just to his father but to everyone around him. One day, a letter arrived in the mail, addressed to Jason in Linda's handwriting. Mark hesitated before handing it to his son. "It's from your mother," he said quietly. Jason stared at the envelope for a long moment before taking it. In his room, Jason opened the letter, his heart pounding. Linda's words were raw and filled with regret. She apologized for everything, for betraying Mark, for lying to Jason, and for letting her greed destroy their family. "I don't expect forgiveness," she wrote, "but I want you to know that I am deeply sorry. I hope one day you can find it in your heart to understand how lost I was and how much I regret what I've done." Jason read the letter twice, his emotions a jumble of anger, sadness, and a faint glimmer of sympathy. He didn't know if he was ready to forgive Linda completely, but her words felt genuine. He tucked the letter away, deciding to give himself time to process his feelings. As the years passed, life continued to change for Mark and Jason. Mark's business flourished again, thanks to his hard work and the support of loyal clients who had stood by him. Jason grew into a confident young man, his experiences shaping him into someone wise beyond his years. Though Linda remained in prison, her occasional letters to Jason became a small bridge between them. Over time, Jason began to respond. The conversations were tentative at first, but they grew into something more meaningful. Jason realized that while he couldn't erase the past, he could choose to move forward. One crisp autumn evening, Jason and Mark sat together on the porch, watching the sunset. "Do you think people can truly change?" Jason asked, his voice thoughtful. Mark looked at his son, pride shining in his eyes. "I think they can, if they really want to. But it takes time. And it takes work." Jason nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He didn't know what the future held for his relationship with his mother. But he knew one thing for sure: the love and trust he shared with his father would always be the foundation of his life. Together, they had weathered the storm and come out stronger on the other side, a testament to the power of truth, resilience, and the unbreakable bond of family. Months after Linda's sentencing, the ripple effects of her betrayal continued to shape the lives of those she had wronged. For Mark, the struggle of rebuilding his life persisted, but he found strength in the unwavering bond with Jason. Every small victory, landing a new business deal, renovating their modest home, or simply sharing a quiet meal, was a reminder of how far they had come. Jason, now a teenager, had grown remarkably resilient. His experiences had given him a perspective beyond his years. But they hadn't hardened him. Instead, they had instilled in him a profound sense of justice and empathy. He became deeply involved in his school's debate team, often choosing topics related to ethics and fairness. His speeches captivated audiences, earning him recognition from peers and teachers alike. One evening, as Mark worked late in his office, Jason approached him with an idea. "Dad," he began, a hint of excitement in his voice, "what if we started a foundation? Something to help families going through what we did, legal battles, false accusations, all of it." Mark looked up, surprised by the suggestion. "That's a big undertaking, Jason," he replied thoughtfully, "but I think it's a brilliant idea. If we can use what we've learned to help others, why not?" The father-son duo threw themselves into the project with passion. They called it the Justice Bridge Foundation, a non-profit aimed at providing legal aid and emotional support to families in crisis. With Mark's business acumen and Jason's determination, the foundation quickly gained traction. Local attorneys volunteered their services, and donations poured in from community members who had followed their story. As the foundation grew, so did Mark and Jason's sense of purpose. It wasn't just about addressing their pain, it was about transforming it into something meaningful. They met families facing similar struggles, parents wrongly accused, children caught in the middle of legal disputes, and offered them hope. Meanwhile, Linda's time in prison became a period of profound introspection. Stripped of her wealth and privileges, she had no choice but to confront the reality of her actions. The letters she exchanged with Jason became a lifeline. Though they were sparse and measured, Jason's words often struck a balance between candor and compassion, and Linda clung to them as a sign that she hadn't completely lost her son. One day, Linda received a letter from Mark, unexpected and brief but deeply impactful. "Linda," it read, "I can't forget what you've done, but I've learned to forgive. For my sake and Jason's. I hope you'll find a way to forgive yourself too." The words stayed with her, echoing in her mind as she navigated the monotonous routines of prison life. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of redemption. Back in their community, Mark and Jason's foundation continued to thrive. Their story inspired others to come forward, sharing their experiences and supporting one another. Jason often spoke at events, his voice carrying the wisdom of someone far beyond his years. "The hardest lessons," he would say, "are the ones that shape us the most. My family's journey wasn't easy, but it taught me the value of truth, resilience, and forgiveness." One day, after a particularly successful fundraiser, Jason approached his father. "Do you think Mom will ever really change?" he asked, his tone hesitant but curious. Mark thought for a moment before replying, "I think change is possible for anyone, Jason. But it has to come from within. She has to want it." Jason nodded, his expression thoughtful. While he still struggled to reconcile the mother he had loved with the person she had become, he realized that holding on to anger wouldn't help either of them. Slowly but surely, he was learning to let go. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Mark and Jason stood on their porch, looking out at the world they were rebuilding together. The path ahead wasn't without challenges, but they faced it with hope, knowing they had each other and the strength to overcome anything life might throw their way. As seasons changed and life slowly moved forward, the Justice Bridge Foundation became more than just a community project, it evolved into a beacon of hope. Mark and Jason found themselves at the heart of a movement that brought light to families caught in the darkest of circumstances. Their story, once whispered in tones of pity and scandal, had transformed into one of triumph and resilience. For Jason, the foundation was a way to channel the lessons he had learned through their ordeal. Every family they helped reminded him of how close he and his father had come to losing everything and how vital it was to have support during those trying times. Whether he was delivering an impassioned speech at a fundraiser or sitting quietly with a child whose parent was falsely accused, Jason brought empathy and wisdom to every interaction. Meanwhile, Mark found fulfillment in a way he hadn't expected. Although rebuilding his business had been a priority, it no longer defined him. The foundation allowed him to reconnect with his community, and he poured his heart into mentoring young entrepreneurs who had experienced hardship. Through their work, Mark and Jason began to see themselves not as victims of betrayal but as architects of something profoundly meaningful. Linda, still serving her time, continued to reflect on the choices that had led her to this point. She spent her days working in the prison library, surrounded by books she had never had time to read in her previous life. These moments of quiet solitude allowed her to confront the deep insecurities and fears that had fueled her actions. She started writing a journal, recording her thoughts and emotions in an attempt to understand herself better. One entry stood out among the others: "I thought I could control everything by holding on tightly, but all I did was suffocate the people I loved. I didn't realize that true strength comes from letting go, from trusting others and myself." Linda's journey toward self-awareness was slow and often painful. Her conversations with Jason, though sporadic, became more meaningful. He shared stories about the foundation and the lives they were changing. Though his words were guarded, Linda sensed that he was beginning to see her not just as the person who had wronged their family but as someone striving to change. It was a small comfort, but it gave her hope. Months later, a letter arrived for Linda. It wasn't from Jason this time but from Mark. His tone was measured but kind, and he shared an update about their lives. "Jason's thriving," he wrote. "You'd be proud of him. He's strong, determined, and so full of life. He has your fire. Linda. I see it in him every day." For Linda, the letter was a lifeline. It reminded her that despite everything, there was still a chance, however slim, that she could find redemption. Back at the foundation, Mark and Jason received an unexpected invitation. A national news outlet had heard of their work and wanted to feature their story. At first, Mark hesitated. Reliving their past on such a public platform felt daunting. But Jason convinced him otherwise. "Dad, if sharing our story can help even one more family, it's worth it." The interview was broadcast on a crisp autumn evening. Mark spoke with quiet dignity about the betrayal and the rebuilding process, while Jason's words resonated with viewers across the country. "People think betrayal is the end," Jason said. "But for us, it was the beginning of something better. It taught us that love and trust are worth fighting for, no matter how broken things seem." The response was overwhelming. Donations to the foundation surged, and messages of support poured in from families who saw a reflection of their own struggles in Mark and Jason's story. It became clear that their journey was far from over. This was only the beginning of a legacy they were building together. For Mark and Jason, their work wasn't just about healing others, it was about healing themselves. They had weathered the storm and emerged stronger, bound by a shared purpose and a belief in the power of truth and forgiveness. Though the scars of their past would always remain, they faced the future with hope and determination, knowing that even the darkest chapters could lead to the brightest of new beginnings. As the story of Mark, Jason, and their journey toward resilience and redemption comes to an end, we are reminded of the power of love, forgiveness, and the human spirit to rise above even the darkest challenges. Their path was fraught with betrayal and pain, but through determination and compassion, they rebuilt their lives and created a legacy that now inspires countless others. Their story teaches us that no matter how broken things seem, there is always hope for a brighter tomorrow. With courage and faith, we can overcome even the greatest trials and turn them into opportunities for growth and connection. Thank you for watching Life Stories. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. Together, let's continue exploring stories of resilience, love, and the incredible lessons life has to offer. See you in the next video.